is going to summarize the Oresteia. You know, finally tie a nice little ribbon around Agamemnon's catastrophic landslide of a personal life and close that particular chapter of Greek mytho-history. And then I just kinda didn't. I mean, I had stuff going on, like, you know, college and moving and not sleeping enough, and then drawing 300 frames for the Iliad video, and honestly, I just completely forgot about it. Which is a damn shame, because in hindsight, the Oresteia is one of the most interesting tragedies I've ever read, and the one with the most far-reaching mythological and political consequences. So first of all, some context. If you've seen my video on Iphigenia, then at first I'd like to apologize for the general quality, but more specifically, you're aware that Agamemnon rather famously sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia in order to raise the winds and set sail to the Trojan War. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the number one person most likely to be enraged by this development is Queen Clytemnestra, Agamemnon's wife and Iphigenia's mother. Fortunately for Clytemnestra, she has a whole 10 years to plot her revenge with her boyfriend Aegisthus, so that when Agamemnon returns triumphant from the Trojan War, Clytemnestra has a nice revenge scheme queued up and ready to go. Oh, and on the off chance that Agamemnon hadn't pissed her off enough yet, he also brings back a trophy concubine, the Trojan princess Cassandra, famous for being able to see the future and also for not being able to convince anyone to ever listen to her about said future. Strangely, as soon as they land, Cassandra starts yelling about how Agamemnon's about to get totally murdered, and so is she. Agamemnon's like, "Heh, women, am I right?" and is promptly murdered in the bath by Clytemnestra, who also kills Cassandra. What a twist! One thing we do have to keep in mind when we're reading this story is that in ancient Greece, murdering family was seriously not okay, regardless of the circumstances. Agamemnon got a pass for killing his daughter because the gods ordered him to, but Clytemnestra murdering Agamemnon as retaliation was considered pretty reprehensible just on principle, even though from a more modern perspective it's an almost precedented response. Now, because she wasn't related to Agamemnon by blood, Clytemnestra gets something of a pass from the gods, but the bottom line is we're really not supposed to be rooting for her. So Aegisthus takes the throne of Argos, and part 1 of the Oresteia wraps up on a high note, at least if you're Clytemnestra. So like all the best stories where the appointed bad guys win at the end of Act 1, part 2 begins with a several-year time skip, and Clytemnestra has a nightmare about giving birth to a snake. She worries that this might be an omen that the gods are angry with her for some unknown reason, so she sends her long-suffering daughter Electra, along with a posse of slave women, to offer libations on Agamemnon's grave. Now, Electra is none too pleased with her new evil dad or her old evil mom, and neither are any of the slaves, but they don't really have a whole lot of autonomy, so they do as Clytemnestra says. And it's a good thing, too, because when she goes to the grave, Electra meets her brother Orestes, who's been exiled from Argos for several years. He's back and ready for some sick vengeance, because Apollo's oracle told him he has to stab his mom for stabbing his dad. Orestes and Electra throw out some prayers to their dead dad, then concoct a plan to kill Clytemnestra and also Aegisthus just because. Orestes disguises himself as an ordinary traveler and heads up to the palace, and when Clytemnestra answers the door, he says that he's been sent to inform her that her son Orestes is totally dead. Clytemnestra is majorly bummed out by this, or at least she appears to be. It's kinda hard to tell with her. Anyway, she invites Orestes in, and he promptly navigates his way to Aegisthus, who, thanks to the machinations of the Greek chorus, is totally unguarded. Orestes promptly murders him, and when Clytemnestra comes charging in with an axe, he gets ready to kill her too. But then he's all conflicted and junk. After all, she is his mother. Clytemnestra argues with him for a few lines, but Orestes' hype man reminds him about the Apollo thing, and Orestes makes up his mind, successfully murdering Clytemnestra. So that's cool, right? Well, you know how sometimes when you're watching a cop show and the cops like zero in on the bad guy and the whole plot gets wrapped up all nice and neat, but then you check the timestamp and you realize there's like a whole 20 minutes left in the episode and you're like, oh man, there's no way something's not about to go catastrophically wrong. So Orestes promptly begins hallucinating that the Furies are torturing him for the crime of matricide, which was one of those things that you just super hella weren't supposed to do in ancient Greece. The chorus questions his sanity and Orestes runs off into the night, harried by nightmares that nobody else can see. So part 3 begins when a priestess of Apollo heads into the temple at Delphi for work one morning, at which point she sees Orestes passed out in the supplicant's chair, surrounded by the Furies, who are all asleep. As it turns out, Apollo pulled a total bro move and cast a spell on the Furies to knock him out, so Orestes can take some time to take a nap and then seek refuge in Athens. Orestes starts heading to Athens with the help of Hermes, at which point the ghost of Clytemnestra slaps the Furies awake and sends them off after him again. So Orestes has just enough time to arrive in Athens and throw out a prayer to Athena before the Furies catch up to him. Luckily for him, Athena has been keeping an eye out for him and manifests to take care of this whole mess. So Athena gets the general gist of the situation and says that this whole thing is too complicated for her to judge on her own, so it's time to establish the Athenian legal system. Yeah, so as it turns out, this whole play is basically a giant excuse to explain the Athenian judiciary system. Swerve. So Athena assembles a jury of Athenian citizens and places herself as the judge, and Apollo shows up to be Orestes' defense attorney. The Furies are deeply uncomfortable with this whole prosecution business, being better equipped to enact vigilante justice rather than actual justice, but they give it the old college try anyway. So Orestes gets cross-examined by the Furies, who get him to spill that, yes, he did indeed murder his mother, but in his defense she had it coming, and besides, says Orestes, she wasn't really his mother. If that sounded baffling, don't worry, Apollo's got you covered. See, according to Apollo, motherhood doesn't mean anything. It's really the father that has the true claim to parenthood, and the mother is just a walking fetus incubator. Wow, that concept has not aged very well, has it? Anyway, with all the arguments made, the jury sets about voting, though Athena volunteers beforehand that she's casting her vote for Orestes. As it turns out, the jury ends up in a tie, so thanks to Athena's tie-breaking vote, Orestes is free to go. And go he does, all the way back to Argos and far, far away from the Furies so he can sort out his problems without all the crazy. Athena, meanwhile, persuades the Furies to stick around and help her out with this new legal system she's created. Rather than just punishing people with no regard for context, these new and improved Furies are only here to punish the bad people judged as such in a court of law. With their new role, the Furies are also given a new name, and are dubbed the Eumenides, meaning the kindly ones. So, long story short, the next time you're hunted down by a trio of bloodthirsty demons for the crime of intrafamilial murder or the violation of hospitality rules, make sure to request your phone call. And I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you gave to me. You ought to know.
A Roman soldier runs for his life. Moments ago, whilst on patrol, he caused civil outrage. He does something that was completely unacceptable in Egypt. A furious Egyptian mob is rapidly closing in. They saw this despicable act and hunt him down. The Romans are disgusted that one of their own died in the hands of an enraged Egyptian mob. They are appalled, but they know he crossed the line. A line that no one living in Egypt dare cross. Most of us see a statue of a cat here, a very pretty statue, but to the Egyptians this represented one of their most popular gods. Bastet, the cat goddess of fertility, motherhood, and protection of the home. You might know Bastet in her more recognizable cat-headed female form, but the statue before us was actually the most common way Bastet was depicted. This, however, wasn't always the case. Bastet went through a dramatic transformation 3,000 years ago, almost entirely out of necessity. She was originally a lion goddess. She had the head of a lioness and the body of a woman. The Egyptians recognized lions for their authority and ferocity, a deadly threat. They were respected through fear. Running into a hungry lion in Egypt was not a very fun time. Unless you happen to be a mouse, your impression of a household cat probably isn't a ferocious predator. So this still begs the question, what's the reason for Bastet's transformation? Why did Bastet morph from a fierce lion into a fluffy cat? Our first clues lie in some of the earliest Egyptian mythology. Bastet's father was sun god Ra. Arguably one of the most significant Egyptian gods, he had dominion over the sun. He wielded the strength and the dominance of the Eye of Ra, an instrument of power and vengeance. This was a symbol Bastet was commonly associated with before her transformation. Bastet also had a look-alike lioness sister called Sekhmet. Sekhmet was a vicious warrior goddess who was said to have come to Earth on occasion to eradicate the planet of her enemies. The sisters looked virtually identical, but there were some serious differences between Bastet and Sekhmet. Compared to her warrior sister, Bastet was seen as a more passive, benevolent goddess. The fear and aggression Sekhmet inspired began to create a rift between the perception of the two sisters. Both of their unique qualities slowly developed, their differences exacerbated over time. Sekhmet became more combative and Bastet became calmer. This is made clear in hieroglyphics which tell stories of her softer, more nurturing side.
The parentage of Anubis is quite confused, but the most popular notion seems to place him in the Old Kingdom as a son of Ra and Nephthys. Writings on. Less often, he appears in human form with a canine head. A peculiar symbol of Anubis in the context of mortuary deity is the Imyat fetish, which in ancient times was identified with a certain primordial god. This object consists of the stuffed skin of a beheaded animal, dripping blood and tied by its tail to a pole, which rests in a pot. Anubis is also referred as Anpu, or Inpu, which roots of the name means royal child in the ancient Egyptian language. Inpu has the root of a word which literally means decay. These were the former names of this god, before the Greeks arrive in Egypt and changed them into Anubis.
We're going to learn how it all works. Why do wrinkles appear? Why do gray hairs appear? Why exfoliating your...
At the beginning of the Christian movement, Jesus Christians in the Roman army.
Now, what do you make of it?
Well, this is not a random thing. This is a very purposeful thing. Now, corresponding with the cross inside the room in this building here, on the section of the wall next door.
Costantino, ovviamente, avendo vinto col sangue, deve dare del nemico la peggiore presentazione. Quindi Massenzio è il tiranno. I panegirici dicono le cose più terribili di questo Massenzio, i vizi più turpi gli sono attribuiti.
French bulldogs sniffing for bones. But instead of bones or Christian symbols, this fort revealed a special temple built by Roman officers that were devoted to the pagan god, Mithras. Jutting out from the primordial rock, the sun god Mithras, the son of the sun, slaughters the sacrificial bull. And through the shedding of his blood, the universe is created anew. Italy, the iconography is still Mithraic.
Here we have the three wise men, also known as the Magi. This is the scene as recounted at the birth of Christ, that these three wise men are bringing these gifts to the Christ child. And the hats that they're wearing, in Greco-Roman art, this sort of became the standard hat that would be used in their artwork to denote somebody who's an Easterner.
Might well be Jesus come back to earth, and now suddenly it turns out to be the emperor himself.
Now portrayed as a Christ-like figure, Constantine turned his so-called vision into the official history. And that history was soon propagated by Christian art.
Here we have Raphael.
Yes.
Now, Raphael, when he paints a vision in the sky. It's a cross. By this sign you will conquer, and so on. This is mythology becoming history.
Yes. Even without knowing the narrative, you just want to stare at these frescoes. So this is sort of a last attempt to reaffirm this papal narrative, which had already been shown to be a fiction.
A myth based not on history, but on a fiction. But if Eusebius's biography of Constantine represents the myth, what did Constantine really believe in?
Saying, I am God.
Right. There's absolutely no humility in any of Constantine's self-fashioning. I mean, he's very happy to have a 40-foot-tall statue of himself.
And yet, Constantine's statue of Apollo was not like other pagan images. Crosses of Apollo behind it. According to Marlowe, as you entered Rome, you would have seen Apollo's head looming above the statue of Constantine on his arch, as if watching over Constantine.
Geometry. He's essentially putting himself in a relationship with the Flavians.
Just on the other side of Constantine's arch is the famous Colosseum, built by the Emperor Vespasian Flavius. Across on the left is a triumphal arch built by the same emperor's son, Titus Flavius. And in the center, where there is now a circular depression in the grass, once stood a giant fountain built by Vespasian's other son, Domitian Flavius, one of the greatest persecutors of early Christianity. Why would Constantine want to associate himself so intimately with the Flavian dynasty? As it turns out, the first-century Flavian emperors have gone down in history as the men who destroyed Jerusalem and the Holy Temple in it. They could literally boast that they had torched the house of God. Jesus wept for the destruction of the temple.
Our investigation has revealed that Constantine merged the great pagan sun gods Mithras and Apollo and replaced their images with his own. Maybe that's not blasphemy by Christian standards, but it does tell us what Constantine thought of himself. By depicting himself with rays of light coming out of his head, Constantine was telling the world that he was to be worshipped as a god. Now, where does that leave Christianity? Was Constantine willing to step aside and bow down to the king of the Jews as any Christian would? I don't think so. I think Constantine took Jesus and refashioned him in his own image, thereby turning the anti-Roman rebel we read about in the Gospels into a symbol of Roman imperialism.
To find evidence for this, Simca travels to the Archbishop's Chapel in Ravenna, Italy, where there's a 6th century mosaic that depicts Jesus in a whole new light.
That's a mosaic of Jesus dressed as a Roman soldier. Although if you look at it more carefully, you could see that he's actually a Roman emperor dressed for command. He's got the military equipment, and of course he has the cross over his shoulder. So you can kind of see that Christ
Deal and launched the French Revolution. Jefferson may have been truly attracted to Sally Hemings.
Monticello says that he's the father of her children.
No question.
No question.
This summer, the foundation opened 6 new exhibits, including the plantation's first kitchen. The archaeology uncovered a stew stove of the kind Jefferson found and admired in Paris, where he served as U.S. ambassador to France in the 1780s. Sally's brother, James Hemings, was trained in French cooking in Paris and used the stove here at Monticello. But the main new addition, in what until now was a public restroom for visitors, is a display on the daily life of Sally Hemings, in one of the 2 rooms researchers now believe she lived in. Part of her story is told in the words of her son, Madison, who gave an oral history of life at Monticello in 1870.
Victimes. Ils ont dénoncé, ils ont parlé aux journalistes comme vous.
C'est dangereux.
Quel est le sort des victimes d'esclavage aujourd'hui? Quand ils sortent de l'esclavage, ils viennent, mais il faut les accompagner. Sinon, il y a 2 choix. Ils vont s'installer dans les villes et ils vont grossir les rangs des pauvres, des criminels et des gens comme ça, parce qu'ils sont pauvres. La pauvreté, c'est quelque chose de très difficile. Ou, à défaut, ils retournent chez les maîtres. Ils disent, ah, moi, je me suis libéré, je n'ai rien à manger. Au moins, avec les maîtres, j'avais quelque chose à manger.
Et le prix d'un esclave?
Ah non, je ne sais pas, ça, c'est depuis très longtemps. Hein. On n'a pas connu de vente d'esclaves.
Pas en ce moment?
Non, pas en ce moment, non. Dans l'esclavage traditionnel, que ça vient de la maman. Ça vient de la maman. Quand votre maman est esclave, vous devenez de facto esclave. Et ça, ce sont tous les présidents donc, de la Mauritanie qui se sont succédés sur ce pays. Ils disent que l'esclavage n'existe pas.
Et vous avez peur?
وقاعد خايف كنت ذيك الساعة.
ذيك الساعة ايه والله بطني بعض شديد. بطني هو وحده.
Forced to watch the elections in which he had hoped to be made president from his prison cell.
Les Américains, les Européens, avoir les financements, se balader comme étant des démocrates.
Shortly after our visit, Biram is arrested without charge. He's forced to watch the elections in which he had hoped to be made president from his prison cell. I returned to the Saharan coast, now patrolled by Europe for over 10 years. This beach was for years the departure hold for Africans hoping to reach Europe via the Canary Islands. The Mauritanians were not part of this exodus, but the coastal fishermen did well out of it. The government sent Sheikh Diallo to discourage the migrants from making the perilous voyage, but he then fell prey to the same temptation himself.
C'est quoi ça?
Ça, c'était des cabanes pour des gens qui voulaient partir l'immigration.
Justify slavery using quotes from the Quran. The president called this act blasphemy and demanded the death penalty for him. It was only under pressure from Europe that
whispered about his personal affairs. Among these people, the second president of the United States, John Adams. In a letter he wrote to his sons in 1794, 8 years prior to the editorial calendar wrote, Adams appears to be referring to Jefferson's relationship with a slave girl. However, because the references are veiled in Roman myths, historians can't be sure. But one line in particular has stood out as a possible reference to the Jefferson scandal. When considering reasons Jefferson might have resigned his position as Secretary of State, Adams speculates that Jefferson might be summoned from the Familiar Society of Egeria. During the time, familiar was an innuendo for being intimate, and Egeria was a Roman mythical nymph whose story involves her meeting a king in a secret grove. The slave believed to be Jefferson's concubine, as Callender described her, was 16-year-old Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was the half-sister of Martha Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's wife. Much of Hemings' life was shrouded in mystery for over 200 years. It wasn't until recently that historians looked a little closer into the life of the woman who lived on the Jefferson plantation in Virginia. Despite her connection to the First Lady, Hemings was dealt a different hand in life. She was half African-American and half white. Unlike Mrs. Jefferson, Sally was born into slavery. She arrived at the Jefferson plantation at a very young age. As such, she was tasked with labor within the Jefferson household. Hemings was described by Jefferson's enslaved blacksmith, Isaac Granger Jefferson, as mighty near white and very handsome. And it was recorded that Sally Hemings had long hair that reached her waist. It was noted around the estate that Hemings received the preferable work and never had to work hard labor outside. She served the Jeffersons until Thomas Jefferson's death in 1826. Historians, however, uncovered hidden information in the mystery room of the Jefferson house that was only a rumor during the Revolutionary period. At 14, the young girl, barely a teen, accompanied Thomas Jefferson to France. 2 years later, Sally Hemings' life would drastically change. Thomas Jefferson was the United States minister to France. In 1794, Jefferson, a recent widower, took a trip to France and took Sally Hemings along with him. France was considered a free country and it was illegal to own slaves while living under the French flag. There's a belief that Hemings had the choice to stay in France, where she could have been protected under the law of the French government, but something motivated Sally to return to the U.S. as a slave. Some possibilities included that Hemings didn't have the means to start a life on her own in France, or as a slave she didn't have much of a choice. The last possibility might have been that she and Jefferson might have had a real connection. Historians speculate whether
culture and vocabulary, but how did this come to be? The history of the Franco-descended peoples of Louisiana actually begins in Canada, believe it or not, in the province of Quebec and the maritime areas of Canada's eastern coast, including New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. Back in the late 1700s, all of this area was a part of France's territory known as New France, and the maritime provinces were collectively known as Acadia. The area was very sparsely populated for the time when compared to nearby British North America, with only a few tens of thousands of Protestant minority and an even smaller minority that still practices animistic and shamanistic religions such as voodoo, which is
ours. You know, accept me for who I am. I accept you for who you say you are. Then please give me the same courtesy and accept me for who I say I am.
I'm proud of who I am, I'll tell you that now. I'm Leah LaCour. I'm a Creole woman.
There's a prayer that we say all the time, but you can't find that in American history books.
It was done on purpose with the idea of assimilating them into Anglo-American culture, which was the only way they were going to be American.
They were consumed or subsumed within the greater black society, and as far as outsiders go, there were no longer Creoles of color in Louisiana. And so as a Creole at that time, if you were a white Creole, you knew that your future rested with your ability to fit in the white category. For in America, whites had the power, whites had the rights, blacks did not.
For white Creoles and my Creole people of mixed heritage, the new American system turned their entire world on its ear, forcing a position no one could have imagined.
You have to decide as a Creole, where do you fit? And for the first time, many are realizing I have to fit, because if I don't fit one way or the other, I don't fit in this new American scheme of things. The ones with the lighter skin and then the pure white Creoles were the ones that understood our best shot is to clarify the fact that we are white and we're going to put ourselves in the white category.
Structures and architects and carpenters and masonry people and iron workers and tailors and educators, you will find all of those folk in colonial Louisiana coming out of the Creole culture. But you can't find that in American history books.
It was done on purpose with the idea of assimilating them into Anglo-American culture, which was the only way they were going to be American.
They were consumed or subsumed within the greater black society, and as far as outsiders go, there were no longer Creoles of color in Louisiana.
Creole has had many different meanings over the last 300 years. Most definitions center on New World goods that came from Old World stock. Today, Creole refers to people of non-Anglo ancestry who were born in Louisiana during the French and Spanish colonial periods and their descendants. President of the St. Augustine Historical Society and a leading advocate of Creole heritage and culture.
We view these grounds as being holy and sacred grounds to us, because not only is it the birthplace of our religion, but it's the birthplace of our culture.
Creole culture and heritage has developed and flourished in communities well beyond Cane River.
We have our people everywhere.
There are 60 communities in this state that I can draw a circle around each one of them. And those are the people that we talking about, Creoles of color.
You're in between, so you're Creole. That's not always true. It has a lot to do with family. It does have a lot to do with Catholicism, with genealogy, with the way you were raised, with your beliefs. That's what makes me Creole.
Since colonial Louisiana, Creole culture and heritage has developed and
And you start trying to tell people that, hey, I am in between the black and white race. I'm not black, I'm not white, I'm in between. I'm a Creole. I'm a multiracial person. When you start trying to say that or explain it, 99% of America just does not buy it.
Cane River Creole and author John Sharpie.
This multiracial thing
was founded in 1714.
It was very rude, very crude. To say Natchitoches was founded in 1714 is kind of a false concept, because it was really just a few men in a couple of huts.
Well, with the relationship between Claude Thomas Pierre Matois and the African slave, or the slave lady with African lineage, multicultural people were created. They created multicultural people. And in colonial Louisiana, you had a three-tier society. You had whites and blacks and mixed breeds who became to be known as Creole.
And that is how I came to be, how my people of Cane River came to be.
Each Creole community has one or two families like that are kind of the beginnings of the community.
Through the life of the colony, these relationships became very close, very long-lived. The children born of these relationships were
and a big screen TV to watch the game, you will be well on your way to designing the patio of your dreams with the $25,000 grand prize gift card from the Barbecue Guys. Tickets are $45. Buy two and get a third ticket free. Start dreaming up your design and go to lpb.org.
Matoya, son of Claude Thomas Pierre Matoya and Marie-Therese Coincoint, founded St. Augustine and became the patriarch of a burgeoning Cane River Creole colony. Back in the hands of France, it was also to be the fourth and final time Louisiana would change hands.
Under French rule, we were treated as a unique race, a unique group of people. All of that ended abruptly with the Louisiana Purchase.
So in 1803, when the Americans took over, this was still a French-speaking part of the world.
We were treated as a unique race, a unique group of people. All of that ended abruptly with the Louisiana Purchase.
Cultural state in America, and it's really terrific. We have so many great cultures, and tonight we are looking, learning, and celebrating the spirit of a culture. Bill Rodman is going to be back with us. He's the fellow who shot, edited, produced, wrote, did it all for this. And we also have Dr. Mark Guidry from Natchitoches who's joining us, who has always been into this and knows the community, knows the area, and he's going to share some of his insights with us. But right now, let's go back to Spirit of a Culture.
(1803), a year to be remembered in French Louisiana, especially on Cane River. It was the year Augustin Matoya, son of Claude Thomas Pierre Matoya and Marie-Therese Coincoint, founded St. Augustine and became the patriarch of a burgeoning Cane River Creole colony. Back in the hands of France, it was also to be the fourth and final time Louisiana would change hands.
Under French rule, we were treated as a unique race, a unique group of people. All of that ended abruptly with the Louisiana Purchase.
So in 1803, when the Americans took over, this was still a French-speaking part of the world, and terribly Roman Catholic, thoroughly Roman Catholic.
The Americans were mostly from the Protestant East. They were English-speaking. They didn't understand any part of Latinized culture.
Jefferson's intent to buy Louisiana was not well received in Congress. It wasn't something they all leapt to in a hurry. And one of the things they all worried about was, what are we going to do with all these foreigners?
Foreigners on our own soil? My Cane River people and the Louisiana colony as a whole worried about the same thing. What will we do? What is this democracy they speak of? How are we supposed to behave?
And they didn't exactly cherish the idea that suddenly Napoleon had sold them without them knowing much about it. In fact, it kind of happened without anybody knowing much about it. And it had happened to them once before. They became Spanish subjects that way, and they weren't happy about that either.
The word Creole confused the Americans. They didn't understand the Louisiana colony.
France. And my ancestors and my people never let go of that.
So the whole Creole problem kind of grows out of that big misunderstanding about where Creoles fit.
Meantime, my Creole people kept to themselves on Cane River. The oldest son, Augustin, led the Matoyas de Couleur to a section of Cane River called Albrevel. One by one, each brother followed, and tract by tract, grant by grant, and purchase by purchase, more and more lands came under their collective control. The Creole spirit flourished. Our white Creole neighbors called us the famille extraordinaire, one extraordinary family. they began to intermarry with other Creole families from other communities. As these Creole families grew and prospered, they became the threadwork of a way of life, the patchwork of a culture. They became a people, the Cane River Creole people. But we found ourselves encountering more and more Anglo-Americans and Anglo attitudes. Patras. It intensified around the time of the Civil War.
By that,
to be called upon as being the answer to so many people's questions and misconceptions and understandings on who are Creoles, who are these people. So it was just an awesome experience, but also forced me, and of course the rest of the members of the family.
A word for it, multiculturalism.
From my perspective as a multiracial person, we may individually identify with any aspect of our ancestry as we so choose. I blatantly refuse to accept America's rule of hypo descent, wherein just because of, let's say, our one ancestry, we must identify 100% with that ancestry and turn our backs on all of the other ancestries. My people have never done that. The Cane River Creoles have never done that. We've always walked that in-between road. That's who we are.
We are peaceable people, lovable people, people who respect other people. And it's just time for us to have the same consideration and acceptance.
I am who I am because of the people who have come before me, and I am so proud to be able to stand up and
Rumors began to spread through Cane River in the early 1990s that the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service were conducting a study about preserving Creole culture. Terrell Delphin.
So what we decided was to have a renaissance, a cultural renaissance where we would document our history, we would tell our own stories, we would give credit to the descendants and the ancestors of the accomplishments of generations of the past.
Like he tells you, it ain't about race with him. It's about culture, about being Creole.
We believe that it's our responsibility to take care of our people. This culture is too rich for other folk not to know about it. You see, it's just too important, too significant. All we want to do is be able to identify ourselves as Creole.
Creole Renaissance mothers like Tracy Colson Fontenot are seeing to it the next generation can.
Speculate whether widower Thomas Jefferson, Martha Jefferson, died due to health problems at the age of 33, and Sally Hemings began an intimate relationship. While Jefferson was well into his 40s, Sally was only 16. Whether or not Sally entered the relationship voluntarily remains under heated debate. But one thing is clear, Sally became pregnant. She returned to the United States with Jefferson and continued to live on Monticello Plantation. Hemings would go on to have 4 more children that were rumored to be fathered by Jefferson. Historians believe that she gave birth to them in the secret room that was recently discovered. Sally Hemings returning to the United States with Jefferson does not necessarily mean she was complicit in their relationship. After all, starting a life on her own in a foreign country as a teenage girl would not have been easy, especially coming from a slave background with no resources. Additionally, she was pregnant. The power dynamic of slave master she had grown up under may have influenced the way she saw her relationship with Jefferson, as she was, by all accounts, given special treatment compared to the other slaves on the plantation. The 25-year difference between them also played a role in the nature of their relationship. The room close to Jefferson's personal bedroom was one thing, Calendar Silicious' article was another. John Adams' letter seemed suggestive, but the most compelling piece of evidence that supports the theory that Jefferson was intimate with Sally Hemings came from Jefferson himself. Jefferson owned over 500 slaves on his plantation, and of all those slaves, he only ever granted freedom to a small handful. That small handful was comprised of Sally Hemings and her children as they came of age. They were not only granted their freedom, but also given a stipend as they left the estate so that they could start their lives on their own. Jefferson himself, contrary to his own practices, was opposed to slavery as an institution. Still, this did not prompt him to free all of his own slaves.
Laparoscopic surgery is more beneficial for the patient, but more challenging for the surgeon with steerable devices.
Welcome to JerusalemExperience.com, the place where you can watch videos from Jerusalem and its holy sites from your computer at home. Hi, I'm Aaron Frankel, the founder of JerusalemExperience.com. And today we are visiting the Church of Pater Noster, which means the Lord's Prayer, and it's located on top of Mount Olives here in Jerusalem.
The Pater Noster Church, Iliona, is built on the traditional site of Christ's teaching of the Lord's Prayer. The first basilica at this site was built in the 4th century by the Roman Emperor Constantine under the direction of his mother Helena to commemorate the Ascension of Jesus Christ. Later in that same century, the pilgrim Egeria referred to this church as the Church of Iliona, which means Mount of Olives in Greek. Egeria based her reference on the second Acts of John that mentions the existence of a cave on the Mount of Olives associated with the teachings of Jesus, but not specifically the Lord's Prayer. As for the Ascension of Jesus, Egeria referred to it at a different location where today stands the Chapel of Ascension, at a site nearby also on the top of the Mount of Olives. The church was destroyed by the Persians in 614 AD, but the memory of Jesus' teaching remained associated with this site, and during the Crusades it became exclusively associated with the teaching of the Lord's Prayer. In 1915, the 4th century church had been partially reconstructed but left unroofed. It provides a good sense of what the original was like. The church's dimensions are the same as the original, and the garden outside the 3 doors outlines the atrium area. In the center of the church there are steps that lead into a grotto where some Christians believe that Jesus revealed to his disciples his prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem and the second coming. The grotto also cuts partly into